Hey, what's up guys? Node Investor here, up for another weekly recap of these ever dwindling, falling price crypto markets. It's bearish out there, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to look at the charts. The price action just continues to trend lower, as you all know. It's been an interesting week though in terms of the sentiment reading that I'm getting out there. I'm going to take a look at the very popular, very commonly referred to Wall Street cheat sheet, which just kind of goes through the major cycles, booms and busts, and the various emotions that we see through those. And it's, of course, always anybody's guess where we are within that cycle. So I'm going to share some thoughts on there. There's just been so much bearish sentiment, negative sentiment this week. I mean, there has been in general over the last couple of months, but this week just feels like it hit a little bit of a breaking point. Maybe we're moving into the next phase, and so I'll go over that. Some notable news items, and then we'll look at a few names that are continuing to just power higher. Don't even know that crypto is in a bear market here. There's always a handful of names, not a lot across the board, generally just very much in the red this week. So go into the coin market cap first. Want to take a look at the $1 billion plus club and notice how small this list is starting to get. I remember at one point there was like 30 names on the $1 billion plus club, and now it is 9 names, one of which is Tether, which doesn't count, and so this list continues to dwindle. And then of course you got Bitcoin Cash, the two competing forked coins competing there for the last spot. So we'll look at the next category of price cap, market cap there after this. But looking at the 7-day performance here, Bitcoin down another 6% plus over the last 7 days. Ripple, Ethereum basically following suit. Stellar taking a big hit this week. And of course, the Bitcoin Cash names continue to drift lower, underperforming significantly in both BTC and US dollar value terms. So those are just really dropping off the list fast here. Go into the next range, the 100 million to $1 billion plus club, much larger list of course. But if you look at the top 10, the top 20 names or so on this list, you can see it's still just red across the board. Monero taking a big hit, NEM seeing a big hit, Zcash falling hard, not a lot of green to be had. Waves up another 60% in the last week, just powered higher once breaking out of that prior high we saw. Other than that though, not a lot of green here. You can see there's been a few little standouts, some pops off the lows here over the last day or so, but everything is just very much in a downtrend, continues to go lower, hitting some oversold conditions near term, but doesn't necessarily signify that we're going to see a bottom right away because things are oversold. So we'll deep dive the charts here, looking at the total valuations here, right on the brink of that $100 billion psychological number. Will we go lower? Probably. Odds favor at this point. I mean, you're talking less than $1 billion there. It's not going to take a very big move to send it sub-billion. You're going to see all the tweets. You'll see the news items, the headlines. Cryptocurrency markets break $100 billion market cap. I don't put a whole lot of weights to the market cap, to be honest, because it fluctuates so much. You get forked coins, you get other things that add to that, things fall off the list. But nonetheless, it is watched. I do watch it myself just to get a general feel for the trend of things, but I don't like chart against this or anything like that. But nonetheless, $100 billion sitting there on the brink. Many of you guys that have been around, watched this channel for quite some time, remember we did a bet last year on when cryptocurrency would hit $100 billion to the upside. When will we cross that threshold? And I remember it finally happened in June of last year. I did a Litecoin giveaway. And so here we are on the other side of that after a long, painful grind lower from the all-time high. So hitting that $100 billion mark. BTC dominance continues to kind of sit in the middle of the range there, right around 55% right now. Not a big change versus the alts. Before we get to the charts, let's go take a look at some news items here. So I want to talk about first that panic mode, the sentiment here. So this Wall Street cheat sheet that is very commonly seen, very different varieties of this here. Let me zoom in on that. You can see here we've got the cycle that happens, and this initially was relating to the stock market, the booms and the busts, the bubbles, but this same type of psychology, you'll see it in just about every boom and bust type of acid, any type of bubble type of action. But you can see following the euphoria, you have this complacency, then the anxiety, then the denial, then the panic, which this article was referring to. That's the phase we're in. Following panic, you get that capitulation, and then the anger, and then just kind of this long, quiet, boring accumulation zone, the depression that happens in there, and then finally when things start to rally again, there's kind of the disbelief, the suckers rally, people think it is, everybody's just kind of checked out at that point, not believing any type of bullish action anymore. And so the question is always, where are we within this range, right? And it's, everyone has their own opinion as to where we at. But I personally think we're seeing the anger phase. I think you're seeing a lot of that happen. But this article made some pretty good references as to why they believe they're in the panic phase. And we're yet to see the capitulation, that final big washout panic low. Everybody just throws in the towel at that point. And I could see some very valid points to that. You're seeing a lot of panic. People over the last week, I have seen countless stories, tweets, articles, Reddit posts about, I wish I would have sold in January, and here's my story of how I went from, X amount to $1 million and back down, and just on. And there's just countless stories like that right now. And I'm not knocking them or anything for sharing their experience. In fact, I appreciate those experiences being shared, but it's just so common right now of a narrative that it makes me wonder, are we really in that capitulation now, or is it the anger phase? It doesn't feel like panic. To me, panic felt like that break below 6K. Everyone said, oh crap, here it comes, we're breaking below. But maybe we're right in the middle there between panic and capitulation. We've not seen that yet. I just have to believe, there's just, from listening to some of the folks I talked to that have ridden it all the way up and all the way down, there is a lot of people out there at this point that are just saying, I'm not going to sell anymore. I'm already down 80-90% plus. What's the point of selling at this point? So maybe that's what they're saying, and they finally will capitulate. But I just see a lot of folks in that boat still that are just saying, I'm just at this point going to ride it out and let it go. So it's going to be interesting to see where we're at. But there's just so much right now. I'll link to this article in the notes. It's a very good read. But then they do have a weekly chart here that they talk about the different phases, and they kind of mark up the BTC chart. And so their story here was saying that below that 3K, you'll get that capitulation. Everyone throws in the towel. And then that'll kind of be the low somewhere in and around there, wherever that low ultimately lands. And then we kind of just hit that anger and depression phase after that. So I know it's not exciting, it's not bullish, but that's what this article is pointing out to. So I'd like to get your guys' take. Where do you think we're at? How do you guys feel? And what's been your experience with that? So that's that article. There was another pretty good article here. Mike Novogratz has been in the headlines recently. He was very bullish through most of this year on Bitcoin, calling for some high price points. And this interview by Bloomberg was very well done. And I don't agree with everything Novogratz says, and he has some very high targets here and was overly bullish, but he came forward. He really said, hey, this is what I thought. And he had some valid points, right? If you look at the weekly chart, when we were consolidating in that very narrow range during the late summer months, just above 6K, it could have just as easily broken to the upside if there was a surprise ETF announcement, if there was some other catalysts, right? Obviously, odds favored it was going to break to the downside because we had that big descending triangle that everyone was looking at. But it could have broken to the upside just as easily and kicked off a little bit of a rally. Of course, that didn't happen. Things broke lower. And so he's talking about just some of his thoughts. And I really like the very end of this, right? He's talking about how his fund is going to really prepare for the next ultimate rally that comes, whether that's in 2019 or 2020 or whenever that happens. But this last article really made for some interesting metaphors there. And he was just talking about the euphoria phase, right? And he says it was a drug, and I don't say that lightly. And the interesting part here is that the drug is gone. If anything, we're on the other side of that stage, and there's just this pessimism and fear. Oh my God, it's going to zero. And he says it's not going to zero. We're at the methadone clinic, meaning it feels worse here. This is the ultimate pain threshold, and you're starting to get that point where people are starting to say, I can't take it anymore, and a little bit lower, and I'm throwing in the towel. So interesting scenario there. Is it going to zero? No, it's not going to zero, but you guys know where I stand. I've often said there are many coins, probably a majority of the coins, that will never come back. They may hit a low, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to come back and make new highs. And over the summer I wrote several newsletters talking about that, some of the speculative value that's baked in to a lot of these coins. But other than Bitcoin, maybe some of the top names like Ethereum, but other than Bitcoin, there's very few names that I would just blindly hodl and have 100% conviction in saying that this ultimately will turn around and it'll come back, right? I mean, because we don't know that. And you got to treat a lot of these like startups. Like if I was investing in a startup, I would take the VC hat on and say, hey, 80% of these are probably not going to pan out, but the couple that do are going to pay off nicely. And so that's the approach you got to take. We all know that. We all hear that. Everyone is often told, don't invest more than you can afford to lose, and on and on. But let's be honest, everyone throws caution in the wind when things are going high and crazy, and no one just invests what they can lose. And ultimately, when the crap hits the fan, as they say, there is a lot of anger and frustration that ultimately comes with that. And finally, Pantera Capital braces for potential SEC action against some of the ICOs they've invested in. That ICO mess just continues. Even some of the big funds are being impacted by that because of the potential that some of these ICOs are going to have to refund investors. So what a mess this continues to be. What a cluster it has resulted in. And because of the lack of clarity, because of the lack of direction and regulatory clarity from agencies like the SEC and the CFTC and the IRS, even in regards to taxes. And so now they're kind of going back retrospectively and saying, we're going to enforce all of these regulations after the fact, and it's just causing a lot of mess here. So certainly I don't agree with a lot of what's going on there, but nonetheless, it is what it is. And it's even impacting some of these very large funds such as Pantera Capital and some of their funds. So that's been the week. It's been a rough week. It's been a bearish week. And yesterday we saw the selling pressure really kick up again here as prices broke below and continue to break below some near-term support. So let's take a look at the charts and deep dive some of these here. So looking at BTC first, the level that I was watching going into the week was that 3,300 level, round number, but it was essentially where the battle was being fought here over the last couple of days. You can see here there was this back and forth, prices were undercut, but the bulls would quickly recover it. We saw that tested again here around December 11th. We saw that rally, but then this was the ultimate rally that failed and just really started to kick off another leg down. Ultimately, this set a lower high. It was a descending triangle, and once that broke, here we go again, right? That same pattern that just continues to repeat, failed at resistance, and that 3,300, once that gave, really started to roll over, and we saw some pretty good selling there. Hedged a little bit with another short on the Ethereum side of things. Covered that yesterday when we saw that quick bounce off the lows. But for now, the price is still very much downward. I mean, that's very clear, very easy to see. You can see the downtrend. You can see the moving averages are still inverted. The slope of the moving average is still very much heading lower. And so until that changes, you got to give the sellers the benefit of the doubt. The momentum is in favor of the sellers. Everyone's watching this next target around that 3K, and so it'll be interesting to see if that's where prices ultimately land. Another way I was looking at it here, and I don't make my trades 100% based on this, but it's always interesting to see how things play out from a price perspective and just looking at different ways of doing the technical analysis. And so if you do a measured move of this little descending pattern here that we saw over the last couple of days, and you take the high of that pattern and you extrapolate that from the breakpoint down to the lows. Let me just clone that so you can see that it's the exact arrow there. And if you take that down from that breakdown point, it gets pretty close to that 3K number. So it's going to be interesting to see if that's where the next major support starts to show up. There's a lot of folks looking at that number. It's a psychological kind of round number. It does line up with some historical support. Looking left on this chart here, you can see it lines up with this prior resistance back here in June of last year. So it'll be interesting to see if that's where the support happens and that's where we see a bounce. Now, is that the low? Is that the ultimate low? It's very difficult to say, and it's going to be nearly impossible to tell if that's the low real time when it's happening. That's just the way markets bottom. You may see the signs of a low. You may see the capitulation, the big washout volume, the big bullish reversal, the bounce that follows. And there's going to be a lot of people declaring that was the low whenever it happens. But the reality is, if it's the low with capital THE low, you won't know for sure until several months after looking backwards and then saying, you know what, that was the low. When it's happening, it's very hard to tell if that's the low, and very often you'll see choppy action around there. You'll get a very strong bounce, and then it'll start to roll over several weeks or a couple months later and maybe retest and set a higher low. And so it really is difficult to say that was the low. There are signs you can look at. There are certain things we can see, but ultimately it's not going to be something you'll be able to tell until you look back retrospectively. And that's the same for any markets. You can see that with the stock market. You can see that with the precious metal markets. You can see that even in the 2013-14 crypto bear market. If you look at the BTC prices, there was several potential lows that looked like, hey, that might be it, and then we undercut that and made a new low. So just very difficult to see. There are some levels to be watching. Of course, that 3K is the next zone, and then you're hearing a lot of people say, hey, 2,500, 2,400, 2K. Now I'm hearing a lot of 1,500, 1,200. So it's very bearish out there. The sentiment is at the extreme. Fear index is at the extreme again, and so even if it's not the low, from a time perspective, I'm thinking we're approaching a good intermediate low again. Price wise, it's anyone's guess. We could see a quick spike lower, but between now and the end of the year, it's starting to feel like we're going to see a decent bounce here somewhere around these levels, just because the sentiment index is starting to get there. We're a little bit long on the tooth on the downside with regards to this recent leg lower that we've seen here. Taking an inverse look at this, and I've posted this on Twitter here a few times just to kind of get a reaction, challenge the folks out there to look at it from a different perspective. And some of the tweets I've posted with this chart is I've asked the question, would you buy this chart? And I'll usually show some indicators, and it's really interesting to see the response, especially when people don't realize that it's the inverse of Bitcoin. It's always interesting to see the responses because I'll get some different thoughts. And usually the chart I've been posting is the daily chart. Let me show you the daily chart here. And I've been posting this one and then showing, of course, the breakout that happened, which this corresponds with the break lower from 6K BTC. And so I've been showing this chart and saying, hey, would you buy this chart? And oftentimes when people don't see it's the Bitcoin inverse chart, they say, oh, no way, I wouldn't buy that. There's a bearish divergence here. It looks like it's extended. This thing's about to crack. There's some rising wedge I see there. It's no doubt trending strongly higher. Maybe I'd buy it on a pullback. And so you get a lot of variety, and it's really good to see that. And then when I'll reply and say, hey, that's good. I mean, I like the thoughts, I like the inputs, but that's the BTC inverse chart. And oh no, this chart's going higher then because Bitcoin's going lower. It's just the bias kind of kicks in at that point. So it's always interesting to see that. But I've been checking out this chart, just kind of looking at this one near term. And I would argue that the uptrend in this chart is losing a little bit of steam, right? You can see the volume is starting to trick lower. There is absolutely a bearish divergence here showing up on the RSI as well as the MACD histogram. Does it mean that the chart automatically is going to reverse and break lower and Bitcoin's going to find a low? Not automatically. This can continue to drift higher, but it is signifying a little bit of a loss in the momentum in terms of the sellers. And so I am watching this one. It is interesting to see. Yesterday it broke out again. It was near term, a little bit of a breakout. This is what I was watching here. You can see this little ascending triangle base and then breaking higher, breaking out of range. And this corresponded with the break of BTC going below that 3,300 level. So always a good perspective, just kind of a different point of view here. So that's really the thing to be watching right now is, can Bitcoin find some support between here and that 3,000 mark? Will it correspond with a high volume reversal and a break lower on this chart? And that's going to be kind of some of the clues that I'm watching for here near term. But for now, as I like to say, take it one day at a time. Now let's go take a look at some of the alts and what are some of those names doing here. So first off, Waves, the big winner for the week, just had a massive breakout again. I was pointing out to this level and saying, hey, this is the level to be watching here near term. It needs to push through resistance. If it doesn't, that's going to look like a big double top. There was at the time a slight bearish divergence showing up, but sure enough, it pushed right through, and for the week just gave another big move from that breakout point to where prices are now, up about 30%, but of course in the last 7 days up nearly 60%. So has had a strong move versus Bitcoin, just continues to power higher. But is it extended? Yes, absolutely it's extended. This pullback here was, in retrospect, a very good secondary entry point, but here we are just seeing this thing power higher. If you look at that weekly chart the last 3 weeks, just a massive move off of the low. So no doubt one of the strongest names, if not the strongest names in the market right now. Another one that popped today, Genesis Vision, GVT. And we had that big move here, the last 3-4 hour candles, just very strong action. And it's always interesting. I had this chart marked up from a few weeks back, hadn't looked at it, and this came on the radar today, hit the alert system when it started to rally. And it's always interesting to see that it basically has rallied right back to that prior breakdown point, that prior support, now resistance point, and you're seeing a lot of wicks right in there, so a lot of profit taking showing up as it bounces right into that resistance. So one I'm going to be watching here to see how it acts on a pullback. Can it break through that resistance here? But for now, nothing for me to do on this one, but just a very strong name from the lows, kind of a move out of nowhere, but over the last 3 candles you can see up 20% here in the last day. Another strong one, Polymath, just continues to power higher here. I had this on the radar and I totally missed the entry on this. Unfortunately, I was watching this little bull flag here. It was pausing, had that breakout, and then gave you another secondary entry point there. It just continues to move higher. So very strong name, but just look at these little stair steps, right? When something is trending higher, these make for some very nice bullish consolidations. That's what you like to see, holding above moving averages. Volume contracts as that consolidation takes place, and then on the breakouts, volume expands again, and so forth. And so this one's just kind of the classic stair stepping its way up. Definitely getting a little extended here in the near term. Looking at that daily chart, it's starting to approach some resistance levels here. What I'm watching is this prior support here, and then above that, of course, the prior highs, and we're kind of in that zone now. Pretty stretched from that 10 EMA on the daily chart. So not one I'm going to chase here at this point, but nonetheless, one of the stronger names here today. Looking at some of the bigger cap names here, Litecoin first clears a little bit of resistance here in the near term, trying to put in a low, an intermediate low versus BTC. You can see here on the 4-hour chart, had a couple of big candles. I would have liked to see more volume on that initial move off the low, and it's pausing here right now, maybe setting up a little bit of a bull flag. So that's what I'm watching here, and just not a big move, but it is kind of a counter trend bounce. Major resistance on this one is going to be in and around that 7,800 level. So anywhere between here and there, some targets that I'd be looking at if this continues higher, but it is starting to try to turn the trend here versus BTC. Another one that's been on my radar all week is Tron, and it just definitely trending higher here, but it is pausing and just lacking that upside momentum. And with this recent shift in that, you can see it's starting to form a little bit of a wedge now, not quite that breakout that I've wanted to see here on this name. So I'm still keeping an eye on it because it is trending higher. It is strong, just kind of slowly grinding its way up versus BTC, but it is starting to wedge a little bit here. So if it doesn't break out here in the next couple of days, most likely a break below this trend will signal the end of that move here on the upside, and then I'd be looking for some more pullback down here into that lower mid 300s range. Another one is EOS. I'm watching this one as a breakout candidate. Now this one has a caveat, so I'm going to go into that here shortly, but on the 4-hour chart, very strong, very bullish ascending triangle base here over the last couple of days. Very nice action. I like to see that, so I'm looking for a breakout. On a breakout, you definitely want to see some volume come in, and here's why. If you go to the daily chart, this one has had a major break lower on that daily chart, and the last couple of days, you can probably spot it now, but the last couple of days is just looking like a bear flag bounce right into those EMAs. And so that's what I'm going to be watching. I'm going to be very cautious here, looking for a potential bull trap, fake out reversal to the downside, but it could continue higher. First target I'd be watching here is, of course, that daily EMA pair. So around that 6290 level, and then above that, going into that 6800. I'm liking it on the 4-hour chart. I'm just a little cautious because of this bounce that we've seen here on lower and lower volume on the daily chart. So an interesting one to be watching here. We'll see if we can get some more momentum today. And looking at IOTA, here's a daily chart. You can see a big reversal day today on well above average volume. So showing up very nicely here. You can look at the 4-hour charts, starting to get a bid. There's been very volatile action here. You see these big wicks that may be hard to see on the screen here, but you got these big wicks followed by an upside. Nonetheless, clearing some near-term resistance here. So one I'm going to be watching, testing the next level of resistance here as I record this. But the daily chart is looking like it's trying to put in a low finally. We'll see if we can get some more upside follow through. So many of these names have just been so beaten up that on any move higher, there's just going to be a series of resistance levels that need to be cleared because of the slow grind that has happened on the way down. And these will all act as hurdles where some of the sellers start to show up if prices continue higher. So just something to make note of, but IOTA certainly trying to put in a little bit of a low here after a very tight consolidation. You saw a few breakout attempts to the downside, and those were quickly supported, and now we're starting to see prices move higher. And so one to put on the radar here, looks like it may be finally putting in a low. And finally, QKC just continues to trend higher. I've talked about this one here a few times, and another one that's just breaking out here today again, clearing some resistance, started to edge higher. Next target on this one is these prior highs, so the wick or the candle body, that little range is what I'm going to be looking at. So in and around that 1375 up to about 1400. But this one just continues to move its way up, slowly grinding higher, has these pullbacks, pushes higher, pullback, and a very constructive action all around. So one of the stronger names trending higher all around in the last couple of days. So that's going to be it for today, guys. Just wanted to point out some of these names. Keep an eye on BTC here this weekend. There's not a lot of bullish action, to be fair. Bitcoin looks very vulnerable here, very weak. We could see that quick spike lower. But on the flip side, the sentiment is very negative, very bearish out there right now. And we've already seen several legs to the downside. And so I'm going to be paying attention to a handful of those alts that are potentially breaking out here today versus Bitcoin. I appreciate you guys watching as always. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And until next time, take care, everyone.